What's up everybody, man? Back, welcome to a brand new video, and today we are going to be doing another Godzilla news and updates. In this one, we will be discussing Toho's next Godzilla film, whatever this next one they're doing is, whether it be called Godzilla -2 or I don't know, but we're going to be discussing the next Toho Godzilla film and continuing our chronological journey through the development and release of Godzilla -1 by covering some articles from February which are really juicy. Starting out, I want to show off some artwork from Godzilla Island to represent the idea of a Godzilla -2. I love it. The first artwork I ever saw that represented the idea of a Godzilla -2 came from Shigo Dynamics, and it was this awesome one of Godzilla fighting Anguirus, and I loved the redesign of Anguirus. It's just so kick-ass, and it's so perfect because the artwork today from Godzilla Island takes us back to 1955 with Godzilla taking on the original Anguirus, and this is what I want to see. I know I am not alone. There are so many of you Anguirus lovers out there who are so ready for the dude to have his time to shine once again. I'm not convinced that's the direction Toho would go. I don't know if he's profitable enough for a sequel, but man would I love it, and I'm ready. I want that -1 Godzilla to get into some brawls. Additionally, Godzilla released this artwork of Godzilla taking on Mothra in a very 1964 setting with the egg right there, and I just thought it was super cool. A little Godzilla news roundup piece for you here. The Godzilla store Tokyo expanded and featured a Godzilla -1 statue and setup starting on April 4th and running for quite some time. As you can see here, here's a mock-up of it, but because of that, the Godzilla store was temporarily closed while they expanded. While I visited the Godzilla store Tokyo, they did have a little Godzilla -1 display. It was pretty awesome. We got to see that Godzilla concept art as well as some photos from the premiere and a poster signed by Yamazaki. If you want more details on that and you want to see what the Godzilla -1 locations look like in real life, now basically 80 years later because the movie takes place in the 40s, go check out the first episode of Godzilla Ground Zero, the new series I started in which I travel to Godzilla filming locations in real life to show what they look like all these years later and what they look like in real life to begin with. Alright, we've got a lot to get through here. So first of all, Variety did an interview with the 4 Shiorogami VFX team that were nominated for the Oscar for Godzilla -1. This includes Tatsumi Nojima, Masaki Takahashi, Kyoko Shibuya, and Takashi Yamazaki. Now the actual interview was pretty lengthy, but I'm only going to give you the highlights here. So if you want to watch the full thing, you can go check it out, linked in the description below. Turns out Godzilla -1 did not have a Phase 1 Oscars campaign like all the other nominees, meaning they submitted pre-release materials showing their interest in applying for the Oscar. Turns out that Godzilla -1 actually just submitted the day before the deadline. Like, they barely made it before the deadline, and there was no build up to it at all. It was very, as Yamazaki says later, unorganized. Yamazaki says it will take years to process all of this and what it means for both him and Godzilla. He then thanks Godzilla for whatever comes next in his life, saying that he owes it all to him. The film had 35 VFX artists and 610 VFX shots. They divided the tasks the best they could, but didn't try to make things even. They tried to do things based off a set of factors that grouped shots differently. The VFX artists all worked on about 3 times the amount of shots they normally would for a movie of this scale, including 5 or so artists who only worked on water effects sequences. Nojima actually has a passion for water sequences and was the reason Yamazaki included so many in the final film, increasing the number of shots to 100 VFX shots, including shots of Godzilla rising up and diving down into the ocean. Nojima was the head of the water division. Yamazaki worked in the VFX with the team, working on a chunk of tasks no one else wanted due to their difficulty and the time-consuming nature of them. It was done so that Yamazaki could demonstrate that he was willing to work just as hard as his crew and alongside them, so they didn't feel misused by him and so that he wasn't left out. This included things like adding trees to environments and adding smoke to Godzilla's spines. The decision to include Godzilla so early on in the film as he appears in the opening sequence on Toho Island was to allow you a quick thrill up front so that you'd get invested in the movie, and then allow you to sink in for just enough time to forget Godzilla's in the movie at all, only for it to shock you with the reveal when he shows back up angrier than ever. I think it worked perfectly. Shibuya then reveals it's almost impossible to meet another woman VFX artist in Japan, especially on a supervisor level. She says she was humbled to learn that this is the exact same experience women have in America, and she wants to share the message that all VFX artists are bonded despite their language barriers through their love of filmmaking, and she hopes to see the industry become more inclusive and welcoming in the future. And I think that's a really nice message, and I wanted to spotlight that. Shibuya was the first woman of color to ever win in the category of VFX at the Academy Awards. There was a Godzilla -1 behind-the-scenes VFX featurette released with tons of information. A shortened version of this that was altered played before the Godzilla -1 re-release that just hit theaters recently, and if you want to hear more about that, you can go check out my review of that re-release now. Jumping through the one that was released on YouTube, Yamazaki introduces Shirogami, his VFX company, through a stop-motion Godzilla. He reveals it took 35 people 8 months to make 610 shots for -1. The crew needed to learn how to maximize their limited resources. To speed things up, Yamazaki was the VFX supervisor, so there wasn't a lengthy bureaucratic approval process. The VFX team also worked on one floor to make shot approvals as fast as possible. The limited budget made it so that they could only build one section of one ship as the practical set for all of the warships in the film, meaning all of the film's ships used the exact same set. That blew my mind when I saw that. That is crazy. They did such a great job you would never notice. An interior set was built indoors, but it didn't have the budget for hydraulics to move it as they hoped. Instead, they used a crane and actor movements synced up to simulate as if the boat was moving. Even shots where the ship was supposed to be moving into shore were cheated using a similar method of having the camera move and then compositing it against a shot with the camera at a stationary reference point so that they could be comped together to create the idea that the boat was moving, when instead it was just a camera trick. The same tilting platform was used for the tilting of the ship and the collapsing of the roof. That's also awesome. I never would have noticed that. The Shinden was a practical body moved by people using a large rig. I love the old school filmmaking there, and it comes across so well on screen you would never know. They had a smaller cutout section for the ship that they could use for the cockpit, again rotating it by men and women. The recreation of 1940s Ginza was a huge task. No filming locations were used, instead they relied on small sets and green screens. These were all done in a parking lot and used minimal set dressing. Godzilla was made in tremendous resolution so that it could be used for close-ups. The model was mapped based on physics models with millions of polygons and different color maps. Water effects were also super hard. Small little things like creating simulations that could track and match the wakes left by the real-life ships on set was incredibly difficult. 5 terabytes of data were used per second of footage for these VFX sequences. On location, while Godzilla was chasing them around, he was actually being played by another small boat. They made intense use of green screen on this film, and Yamazaki would bring around a Godzilla model to set to capture Godzilla in the natural lighting of the actual day so that they could capture the way the light bounced off his skin to better match him to his environment while in the VFX process. The film is a combination of traditional and modern special effects to show true innovation and perseverance on all accounts. There's a reason the movie won the Oscar, and that's why. It was an incredibly small, incredibly hardworking, and passionate crew who did a wonderful job. They were up against big odds and they somehow pulled it off. In my opinion, Godzilla -1 features the best visual effects of the entire franchise, specifically when we're talking about those water sequences. As for Godzilla -2, or whatever we're gonna wind up calling the new Godzilla movie, while there is no official confirmation that it will be a sequel to Godzilla -1, all we know is that director Takashi Yamazaki will return to direct the next Toho Godzilla movie. We do have some idea as to what Yamazaki would do if he was given another chance to direct a Godzilla movie. He says the film's success has opened lots of doors with US filmmakers reaching out, wanting to collaborate and work together with him. His hope is that there's a sequel opportunity in here somewhere, and that thanks to the US fans making Godzilla -1 such a hit, it is a huge possibility he'll get one. He tells fans to hang tight because he's very hopeful that that's what Toho will allow him to do. He wants to continue the story of the characters from Godzilla -1 with the full cast returning, and I think that's a wonderful idea. We are so attached to those characters because they are the best we have seen in the franchise. His hope is that another studio, maybe one from the US, would be willing to join Toho in co-producing the movie, teaming up to give the film a bigger budget. He says if this happens, his goal would be to use an international cast with some A-list actors from Hollywood. For instance, he wants to work with some of the cast of Oppenheimer, which would be very ironic. He says he wonders if some Hollywood actors would be willing to work for less to be a part of a Japanese movie because the Japanese industry can't afford them. He then says, which this is the most interesting and exciting of all, because there have been 2 solo Godzilla films back-to-back in Japan, it is time to see the Japanese Godzilla take on an opposing monster once again. As for what US stars I'd love to see star in a Godzilla -2, I don't know. I'm sure there's plenty who could be awesome. Some of the stars of Oppenheimer would be great. I'd love to see somebody play Douglas MacArthur and give that character some justice and some screen time. I think that'd be cool. Give some real historical figures some context in the -1 universe would be awesome. And then as for like people willing to work for less, I think Kurt Russell kind of did something like that for Monarch Legacy of Monsters, where he broke some of his rules to work on that because it's a Godzilla project. Of course, going to television and working with his son. I think those are two things that he said he was a little apprehensive to do, but he did it because it's Godzilla. So who knows, maybe Kurt Russell could become one of our new Godzilla reoccurring faces and he could be in -2. I'm all for it. I'll take anything that he's in. And then as for the enemy monster, I'll do a video coming out soon where we speculate about what monster Godzilla might fight, but for now, let's jump into another interview where we have a little bit more details about what Yamazaki would cook up with Godzilla taking on an enemy opponent. Speaking with Empire, Yamazaki revealed a lot of details about a potential sequel for -1. First of all, he notes that he's been thinking about where things could go long before he was ever greenlit to work on a sequel. He says he's curious to develop how Shikishima and Noriko's future would go, and he wants to explore that in depth. Of course, Noriko would now have some consequences from -1, with her officially being permanently scarred and in some ways cursed by Godzilla. He notes that Shikishima's war seems to be over and that we've reached a state of peace and calm, but in his direct words, perhaps it's the calm before the storm, and the characters have not been forgiven for what has been imposed upon them. While Shikishima's war might finally be over, Godzilla's is not, and for fans of Shikishima and fans of the characters of -1, that is devastating to hear, but it'll be pretty exciting to find out where things go from here. It calls back to the quote used in the trailer for Godzilla -1, "That monster will never forgive us." I love that idea. The idea that Godzilla is just the incarnation of rage and will never forgive, and that he is all of the bad things manifested into reality. I love it. Yamazaki wants to tackle the challenge of creating a serious tone in a kaiju versus kaiju story with human drama. Of course, he has stated he's not the biggest fan of when Godzilla films become overly cutesy or overly cartoonish with their action. He says it's easy to make a movie where the emphasis is on the spectacle of the monsters fighting. Whenever the monsters fight, that's where the emphasis goes, rather than the human drama. But his goal is to try and remain attached to the core human component throughout all of the monster battles to keep us centered on the dramatic story at the heart of it all. His goal would be to find a way to give meaning to both the human drama and the kaiju drama at the exact same time, having them affect one another in meaningful ways that both develop the plot and relationships there within. I love that idea. I think we saw a very valid attempt at that with Godzilla 2014, and I don't think it totally landed. I think that movie skews far too into the human territory, but I love the idea of giving this another shot. If I was to look back at Godzilla history, I do think there are two movies that do a pretty good job at maintaining a very serious tone overall, while still having some humor and levity to them, and creating a good balance between both the human story and the monster story, and that's Mothra vs. Godzilla from 1964, which I think is by far the most successful at that out of any Godzilla film ever, and Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, aka GMK, although that movie was a little more darkly sinister in its comedy. The core thing with both of those movies is that the humans react to the monsters, and the monsters react to the humans accordingly in appropriate and dramatic ways that retain the weight, ferocity, core thematic components, and complexity of the kaiju, and adding all of those things to the human stories. For me, Mothra vs. Godzilla really is the golden standard for a Godzilla vs. movie, and that's why I think that movie does the best job balancing all of that at once, having a great human story with great memorable characters with wonderfully complex themes, and giving all of that to the monsters at the same time. It is just brilliant, and I really hope Yamazaki can pull it off. And if there's any director in the modern age who I think could, it would be him. Of all of the Godzilla directors we've gotten from Gareth Edwards to now, I think he is the one who has the most potential of pulling off a perfect balance, and that's what I'm excited to see. What about you guys? What are you most excited for in a Godzilla -2? What are your thoughts? Please comment down below and let me know. Also, please like the video and subscribe while you're here. Liking the video and commenting on the video are great ways to get this video out there to make sure more people can see it, and are wonderful ways to support the channel, as is supporting the Patreon. Big thank you to all of my patrons over on the Patreon. That is the most direct way to support this channel, and the most direct way to make sure that I can continue to make videos like this for you. If you want to support the Patreon, you can use the link in the description below, where you can get early access to content, access to the Discord community, and more. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you all next time for the next one. D-Man, out.